The sound of his hand striking her face cracked through Castellano's diner like a snapped branch, leaving the new waitress unconscious on the cold tile while the entire room froze in terrified silence. Amelia Hayes, 27 years old, a woman who had already survived an abusive marriage, escaped a violent husband, and rebuilt her life from nothing in the streets of New York, now lay motionless with blood trickling from her split lip. She had endured 6 years in an orphanage after losing both parents at 12. She had slept on sidewalks, starved for days, and carried scars on her back that never fully healed. And now, in the one place she thought she could finally disappear and start over, violence had found her again. Derek Lawson stood over her, triumphant and arrogant, his dark shirt blending into the shadows of the booth he had been watching her from all night. He had expected fear. He had expected submission. What he got was indifference, and that was something his ego could not tolerate. Now he looked down at her crumpled body with satisfaction, completely unaware that the front door was opening behind him for the one man in this city who doesn't believe in second chances. Vincent Castellano stepped into his own diner and saw the blood. 36 years old, born into the underworld, raised to rule it, black suit, no tie, shirt open at the collar, tattoos crawling up his neck like quiet warnings etched into skin. His hair was perfectly styled, untouched by the chaos he was walking into. His expression was cold, focused, unreadable. He had done cruel things to protect his empire. He had buried men who crossed him without losing sleep. But Castellano's diner was neutral ground. Violence here was forbidden, and someone had just broken the only rule that mattered. He didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't wait for excuses. He closed the distance in silence, each step deliberate, each breath controlled, until he stood directly behind the man who had dared to spill blood in his sanctuary. The entire diner held its breath. Plates stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the walls seemed to lean in, waiting for judgment. What happens next will change everything. A waitress who learned that silence was survival will discover that silence can also be a weapon. A mafia boss who built his reputation on fear will reveal that true power lies in restraint. And a diner that has stood for decades as neutral territory will transform into something else entirely. A place where the rules have been rewritten in blood. If this satisfies your interest, click the like button and share with friends who appreciate stories like this. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what is coming next. Now, let us get back into the story. A few hours before blood would spill across the cold tiled floor, Castellano's diner looked like every other dusk it had known for the past 60 years. The lights came on slowly, one by one, their pale golden glow spreading over the black and white checkered tiles and the deep red leather booths like a memory rehearsed to perfection. Outside, the streets of Brooklyn roared with traffic, and half-finished conversations drifting from passers-by. But inside, time slowed. Plates clinked softly against each other. Coffee was poured with steady, practiced hands. The air carried the scent of grilled onions, aged wood, and something harder to name. Perhaps history, perhaps secrets, perhaps blood long since dried into the cracks between the tiles that no one remembered anymore. This place had watched decades pass without ever changing its face. It had its own rules, though no one ever spoke them aloud. You came in, you ate, you paid, and whatever kind of person you were beyond those doors, you left that behind outside. That unspoken agreement was the reason Castellanos had survived so long. This was neutral ground, where bosses from rival crews could sit a few tables apart without reaching for their guns. This was where negotiations unfolded to the gentle clink of glasses, where blood debts were left on the doorstep, where even the coldest killers bowed their heads to a single law: no violence inside Castellanos. Vincent's grandfather had made that rule 60 years earlier, when he built the diner on the bones of an abandoned warehouse and declared it sacred ground. Vincent's father upheld it with blood and iron for the next 30 years. And now Vincent Castellano, the third generation, the heir to the throne of Brooklyn's underworld, guarded that legacy with a hand heavier than both men before him. The diner's red brick walls had seen everything. They had watched the most powerful men in the city eat apple pie as if they were ordinary fathers. They had heard plots whispered in dark corners and threats swallowed along with black coffee. They had kept silent when sworn enemies shook hands in public and then turned away with knives already waiting in their sleeves. But never, in 60 years, had blood stained these tiles. Never, not until tonight. The servers here knew the rules. They knew not to ask names, not to look too long, not to remember faces. They were paid generously to be blind, deaf, and silent at exactly the right moments. In return, they were protected. No one dared touch a Castellano's employee. because doing so meant touching Vincent himself, and no one was insane enough to do that. At least, that was what everyone believed. That belief was what kept the diner running smoothly, like a perfectly oiled machine. But rules are only strong when someone enforces them, and protection only matters when the one who breaks it still knows fear. Tonight, a man would walk into Castellanos and forget all of that. Tonight, 6 decades of neutrality would shatter with the sharp crack of a slap, like a branch snapping in two. And tonight, Vincent Castellano would remind the entire underworld why no one ever dared to cross his red line. Amelia Hayes knew nothing about those rules when she stepped behind the counter to begin the night shift. She only knew that her feet already ached, even though she had been working here for less than a week. She tied her apron carefully, her fingers smoothing each fold of the yellow fabric as if precision might soothe the anxiety coiling in her chest. The uniform did not yet belong to her. Nothing here belonged to her. New places never did. She moved between the tables with steps so light it was as if she did not wish to leave footprints, memorizing every face, every habit, every small detail others would overlook. Who needed more coffee? Who wanted to be left alone? Who spoke too loudly? And who was quiet in a way that felt dangerous? She learned quickly, because she had to. Life had taught her that those who did not observe did not survive long enough to regret it. Her voice was always gentle, her smile polite but distant. She did not linger, did not invite conversation, did not give anyone a reason to remember her. Most customers barely noticed she existed, and that suited her perfectly. Invisibility was a skill Amelia had sharpened for 15 years. She knew how to lower her shoulders just enough to seem smaller. She knew how to keep her eyes down without appearing weak, how to listen without letting anyone know she was listening. She knew how to turn herself into part of the wall, part of the air, part of the things people looked past without truly seeing. That was how she survived the orphanage. That was how she endured 3 years of hell beside Richard. And that was how she hoped to disappear in this city, where 8 million people crowded together without ever truly seeing one another. Yet the regulars at Castellanos noticed her, not because she stood out, but because she did not. In a world where everyone was trying to be seen, Amelia's invisibility became the most noticeable thing about her. They noticed how she listened more than she spoke. They noticed how her gaze stayed lowered but never unfocused, as if she tracked everything through peripheral vision. They noticed she did not smile at jokes designed to test her, did not flinch when voices rose at a nearby table. It was not fear. It was something else. Control, perhaps, or training that had become instinct. A few men in the diner tried to strike up conversations with her. She responded just politely enough to avoid offense, just coldly enough to discourage more. A few tried to look at her longer than necessary. She did not look back, did not challenge, did not react. She simply kept moving, kept working, kept breathing evenly, as if her heart were not beating faster than usual. She had learned long ago that reacting to the wrong kind of attention was an invitation, and Amelia Hayes had stopped sending invitations a very long time ago. Tonight was no different from the nights before. She carried coffee, cleared tables, memorized orders, avoided eye contact, kept her distance. She told herself that if she could just get through this shift, then the next day, she would slowly save enough money to disappear again if she needed to. She did not know that in a booth at the back, a man had been sitting there since before she arrived, and his eyes had not left her for a single second. She did not know that the invisibility she had spent her life building was about to collapse within a few hours. And she did not know that tonight, the past she believed she had buried would find her once more, not in the form of Richard, but in the form of a stranger with predatory eyes and an ego that could not tolerate indifference. The invisibility Amelia wore like armor was not something she had been born with. It was forged from pain, cast from loss, perfected through every scar life carved into her soul. To understand why she moved like a ghost among the tables of Castellanos, one had to turn the clock back 15 years, to a winter night in the suburbs of Boston, when a 12-year-old girl still believed the world was a safe place. Amelia remembered that evening with aching clarity. She had been curled up on the old sofa in the living room, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the book her mother had bought her for her birthday. Her parents had gone out to buy a cake, a chocolate cake with 12 candles she had been begging for all week. They said they would be back in 30 minutes. 30 minutes became an hour became 2. Then the doorbell rang, and when Amelia opened the door, she saw 2 police officers standing there with expressions she would never forget. The faces of people about to say something that would destroy a child's entire world. A drunk driver had run a red light and slammed into her parents' car. They died instantly. No pain, the officer said, as if that could comfort a child who had just lost everything. Amelia did not cry that night. She did not cry at the funeral. She did not cry when they took her to St. Mary's orphanage on the outskirts of the city, a gray brick building with windows that looked like hollow eyes. She did not cry because her tears had frozen somewhere deep in her chest, in a place she would never reach again. The next 6 years were 6 years of hell no one saw. The orphanage was not a place for sensitive, imaginative children like Amelia. It was a battlefield, where the strong devoured the weak and kindness was treated as a fatal flaw. The older children targeted her from the very first week. They hid her belongings, tore her books, locked her in closets for hours. They called her names she still heard echoing in her nightmares. The unwanted one, the discarded one, the girl whose parents had died just to escape her. Amelia learned her first lesson in survival during those early months at St. Mary's. Do not stand out. Do not draw attention. Do not let anyone remember you. She began eating alone in the farthest corner of the dining hall. She stopped raising her hand in class, even when she knew the answer. She learned to walk close to the walls, learned to lower her head just enough to avoid eye contact, learned to turn herself into part of the floor, the wall, the air. Invisibility became instinct, silence became language, and loneliness became the only companion she trusted. Nights in the communal dormitory were the longest. Amelia lay on her cold iron bed, staring at the ceiling stained with damp, trying to remember her mother's voice. But memory was a traitor. It faded with time, like old photographs bleached by the sun. First, she forgot the scent of her mother's perfume. Then she forgot the sound of her father's laughter. Then she forgot what it felt like to be held, to be loved, to be called someone's daughter. By the age of 15, Amelia had become a perfect shadow. She moved through the halls of St. Mary's without leaving a trace. She existed without truly living. She breathed without feeling the air fill her lungs. The children who bullied her eventually gave up, not out of mercy, but because she had become too dull to be worth targeting. That victory tasted more bitter than any defeat. Amelia's 18th birthday was also the day she walked out of St. Mary's gates with a small bag on her shoulder and $20 in her pocket. No one saw her off. No one hugged her goodbye. She simply vanished from the system, a dash in a file, a number no longer worth counting. She stood on the sidewalk and looked back at the gray brick building one last time, and promised herself she would never let anyone have power over her again. She would take care of herself. She would protect herself. She would need no one. But life, as Amelia would soon learn, had its own way of breaking promises. 5 years after walking out of the orphanage gates, Amelia was still struggling to survive. She had done every job a woman with no degree, no family, and no permanent address could find. Waiting tables, washing dishes, cleaning hotel rooms, working overnight cashier shifts in convenience stores where customers looked through her as if she were made of air. She had slept in an old car bought with a year's worth of savings, gone hungry when rent swallowed her entire monthly pay, learned how to live on less than the bare minimum a human being needed to be considered alive. But she endured. She kept breathing. She kept moving forward even when she did not know what lay ahead. Then Richard Hayes appeared. He walked into the cafe where she worked on a spring morning when Amelia was 23 years old. Tall, handsome, with a warm smile, and eyes that knew how to look at her as if she were the only person in the room. He ordered black coffee and left a generous tip. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. He asked her name, asked what she liked, asked what she dreamed of. No one had ever asked Amelia those questions before. No one had ever looked at her as if her answers truly mattered. Richard was the first beam of light to pierce her dark life after more than a decade. He was patient, gentle, never forceful. He brought her flowers on days she did not expect them. He listened as she spoke about the orphanage without a trace of pity. He told her she deserved to be loved, deserved a family, deserved a place to call home. And Amelia, the girl who had built walls around her heart for 15 years, finally let someone in. They married when she was 24 years old in a small ceremony at City Hall. There were no guests because she had no one to invite. Just Richard, her, and a tired-looking clerk. That night, when they returned to the small apartment Richard rented in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Amelia believed she had finally found her harbor. Finally, she belonged to someone. Finally, the nightmare that had begun when she was 12 years old was over. She was wrong. She was catastrophically wrong. The first time Richard hit her was 3 months after the wedding. He was drunk, angry because she came home 15 minutes late from work. The slap came so suddenly, Amelia did not even have time to dodge. She fell onto the kitchen floor, her cheek burning, her ears ringing, staring up at the man she called her husband with disbelief in her eyes. Richard cried afterward. He knelt, held her, apologized hundreds of times, swore it would never happen again. He blamed the alcohol, the stress of work, his own unhappy childhood, and Amelia, who had longed for love for too long, who had been lonely too deeply, believed him. She forgave him. She stayed. It was the greatest mistake of her life. The beatings that followed came more often, heavier, more brutal. Richard no longer needed to be drunk to hit her. He hit her when the food was slightly cold. He hit her when she looked at another man on television for too long. He hit her when she did not smile brightly enough or smiled too much. He hit her when he wanted, and the reason was something he invented afterward to justify it. But the blows were not the worst part. Control was what crushed her slowly, day by day. Richard cut her off from the outside world. He made her quit her job out of jealousy. He checked her phone every night. He did not allow her to keep money, did not allow her to go out alone, did not allow her to speak to anyone but him. The small apartment in the suburbs of Philadelphia became a prison, and Richard was the warden with hands that knew how to strike places that left no marks. The scar on Amelia's back came from the night she tried to escape for the first time. Richard caught her packing a bag and flew into a rage. He whipped her with a leather belt until she no longer had the strength to scream. The red welts became scars, and they were still there 3 years later, reminding her of the price of rebellion. 3 years, 1,095 days, 26,280 hours. Amelia counted every second, because it was the only way she could endure. She became an expert at hiding bruises under makeup, at explaining injuries with stories of clumsiness, at smiling when she wanted to cry and staying silent when she wanted to scream. She became a ghost in her own life, existing but not living, breathing but not feeling, seeing but not hoping, until one night 6 months ago, when Richard came home more drunk than ever and wrapped his hands around her throat until she nearly lost consciousness. Looking into his eyes that night, Amelia did not see anger. She saw absolute emptiness, the indifference of someone ready to kill his wife without a tremor, and she understood that if she did not escape now, she would die in that apartment, and no one would ever come looking for her body. Amelia waited 3 weeks after that fateful night, 3 weeks for Richard's vigilance to fade, 3 weeks to quietly hide every loose dollar he did not notice, 3 weeks to memorize his routine, until she knew exactly when he drank himself into a stupor so deep he would not wake even if the ground shook. The night she escaped was a Friday night, when Richard came home from drinking with coworkers and collapsed onto the sofa at 2 a.m. Amelia lay still in bed for another hour, listening to the steady rhythm of his snoring, counting each breath like a countdown to freedom. Then she slipped out of bed, moving so lightly she barely touched the floor. Everything was already prepared. A small bag with a few changes of clothes, all the money she had managed to hide, a total of $317, a small knife for protection, and a note she did not leave, because she owed Richard Hayes no explanations of any kind. She opened the front door with trembling hands, her heart pounding so wildly she was certain he would hear it. But he did not stir. He lay there, snoring as if nothing in the world mattered, and Amelia stepped outside, drew her first breath of freedom in 3 years, and ran. She ran to the nearest bus station and boarded the first bus leaving Philadelphia. She did not care where it was going as long as it took her far from that place. That bus brought her to New York, and when she stepped off at the Port Authority terminal at dawn, she looked up at the skyscrapers, catching the first light of the new day, and told herself this was where she would disappear. 8 million people lived in this city. 8 million faces, 8 million stories, 8 million reasons, for no one to remember a small woman with a scar on her back and ghosts in her eyes. Richard would never find her here. No one would ever find her here. She would dissolve into the crowd like a drop of water into the ocean. The first weeks in New York were the hardest. Amelia slept in cheap hostels she paid for by the day, ate instant noodles and stale bread, went to dozens of interviews that never called her back. The money ran out, hope drained with it, and there were nights when she sat curled on the sidewalk at 3 a.m, wondering whether she should return to Richard or starve here. But every time she considered going back, she remembered the emptiness in his eyes that night, his hands tightening around her throat, and she knew she would rather die on the streets of New York than die at the hands of that man. Then she found Castellano's diner. She passed by the place one afternoon while job hunting in Brooklyn and saw the small sign taped to the glass, hiring night shift servers. She went in and spoke with the manager, a middle-aged man named Tony with tired eyes but no cruelty in them. He did not ask about her past, did not demand identification beyond a name, did not wonder why a young woman carried the eyes of someone who had lived through hell. He only asked when she could start, and Amelia said right now. She did not know what Castellano's was. She did not know about the unspoken rules, the neutral ground, the man named Vincent Castellano standing behind it all. She only knew it was a job, an income, a chance to survive one more day. And in Amelia's world, survival was already a greater victory than anything she dared to dream of. Her 5 days working at Castellano's passed quietly. She learned how to move between the tables without being noticed. She learned how to avoid the eyes of strange customers she did not understand. She learned how to become invisible once more, because invisibility was the only thing she truly knew how to do well. She began to think that perhaps this was a place she could call home. Perhaps she had finally escaped the darkness. Perhaps the past would stay where it belonged, behind her, growing farther away with every completed shift. But Amelia was wrong, because at that very moment, in a booth at the back of the diner, a man with predatory eyes was watching her move between the tables, and the darkness she believed she had left behind was preparing to find her again, not in the form of Richard Hayes, but in the form of a stranger named Derek Lawson. Derek Lawson had been sitting in the back corner booth since before Amelia began her shift. He slid into the deep red leather seat at 5 in the afternoon, ordered a cup of black coffee he did not bother to drink, and began to watch. Watching was what he did best, observing, waiting, searching for a weakness in the prey before striking. 32 years old, Derek was the kind of man women instinctively avoided if their instincts were sharp. Not because he was ugly, on the contrary. He had a hard-edged face and a powerful build many would call attractive, but because there was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating, like a snake deciding whether its prey was small enough to swallow whole. He was a low-level enforcer for the Moretti crew, the long-standing rival of the Castellano family in Brooklyn's underworld, not important enough to sit in on major meetings, but ruthless enough to be trusted with the dirty work his superiors preferred not to touch. Derek was not a clever man, but he knew how to use his fists, and he knew how to make others afraid, and in his world that had always been enough. He had come to Castellano's diner that night, not for the food or the coffee, but because of the simmering resentment inside him, the irritation of knowing he had to sit on enemy territory and be allowed to do nothing at all. Neutral ground, unspoken rules. Derek hated those things. He hated bowing to anyone, including Vincent Castellano, a man he considered nothing more than a spoiled heir living off an inherited empire. But his boss's orders had been clear. No trouble at Castellano's. No broken rules. No giving the Castellanos an excuse to start a war the Moretti crew was not ready for. Derek had obeyed for 2 years, swallowing his pride and sitting quietly like a well-trained dog in his enemy's diner. But tonight, when he saw Amelia Hayes step out from behind the counter in her yellow apron, eyes lowered, something inside him stirred. She was pretty, he thought, but not the kind of beauty that demanded attention. It was a softer, more fragile kind, like a wildflower growing from a crack in the pavement. And Derek, who had broken many such flowers in his life, recognized at once that this girl was trying to hide. The way she moved was too careful. The way she avoided eye contact was too practiced. The way she made herself smaller, as if she did not want to occupy any space in the room at all. He had seen those signs before, in women already damaged by other men, and instead of pity, he felt interest. Wounded prey was the easiest prey. He stretched his arm along the back of the booth, fingers tapping lazily against the dark red leather, and let his eyes follow Amelia each time she passed. He made no attempt to hide his attention. That was part of the game, letting the prey know it was being hunted, letting fear seep in slowly before the strike. Most women would have trembled under that gaze, would have fidgeted, grown uneasy, tried to move away or seek help, but Amelia did nothing. She continued moving between the tables with steady steps, continued taking orders and pouring coffee as if he did not exist. She did not look at him, did not avoid him, did not react in any way he expected. And that indifference, that complete and absolute indifference, was what began to gnaw at Derek Lawson's ego from the inside. He was not used to being ignored. He was not used to being treated like air. In his world, people either feared him or respected him, or both. There was no third option. There was no option in which he simply was not worth noticing. The smile on Derek's lips thinned as the night wore on, and Amelia continued to pay no attention to his presence. His fingers tapped faster against the booth, his jaw clenched tighter each time she passed without glancing his way. The irritation that had simmered at first now boiled into anger, and Derek Lawson was not a man who knew how to control his anger. He decided that tonight, the unspoken rules of Castellanos would give way to his ego. Tonight, the quiet waitress with her lowered eyes would learn to look at him. The first remark came when Amelia brought coffee to Derek's booth for the second time that night. She set the white ceramic cup down on the tabletop with a practiced motion, her eyes lowered, making no direct contact with the man seated before her. She intended to turn away immediately, just as she did with every other customer. But Derek's voice cut through the air before she could take her first step. "Hey there," he drawled. His tone relaxed, almost friendly if one did not look into his eyes. "You're new, aren't you? I haven't seen you here before." Amelia stopped. She had heard enough voices in her life to know this was not harmless curiosity. This was a probe, the way a predator tested its prey before deciding the next move. She turned back, her face composed in the calm she had trained for years to maintain. "Yes, sir," she replied in a professional voice stripped of emotion. "I started last week. Is there anything else you need?" It was not the answer Derek wanted. He wanted embarrassment, wanted her cheeks to flush, wanted her to smile nervously or look for a way to retreat. Instead, he received polite indifference, the kind reserved for an unremarkable object. The smile on his lips stiffened slightly, but he waved her off. "Nothing yet. You can go." Amelia walked away without looking back. She felt his gaze burning into her spine, but she did not let it alter her stride. She had endured worse looks than that. She had survived things far more frightening than a man with an oversized ego in a crowded diner. 20 minutes later, Derek called her over again. This time his voice was louder, loud enough for a few nearby tables to hear. "Hey, waitress, come here for a second." Amelia was clearing a table in the middle of the room. She set the stack of dirty plates down and walked toward Derek's booth, her steps steady, her expression unchanged. She stopped at a safe distance, close enough to serve but far enough not to be grabbed if he suddenly reached out. It was an unconscious habit, one Richard had taught her with the times she had stood too close and paid for it with bruises. "Yes, sir," she said. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his eyes traveling over her slowly, without any attempt to hide it. "I'm just wondering," he said loudly enough for those around them to hear, "what a girl like you is doing in a place like this. You're not like the other waitresses. You look like you're running from something." The words pierced Amelia's armor like a cold needle. For a brief moment, she felt the blood drain from her face, but she did not let it show. She had learned long ago how to control her body's reactions, back when a mistimed blink could send Richard into a rage. "I don't understand what you mean," she replied evenly. "Would you like to order anything else?" Derek let out a short laugh, sharp as shattered glass. He was not accustomed to being dismissed like this, not used to the indifference she was displaying. Around them, the air in the diner began to shift. Conversations at nearby tables softened. A few glances flicked toward the back corner booth and quickly turned away. A man at the counter straightened in his seat, fingers tightening around his glass. Everyone felt the tension gathering like dark clouds before a storm, yet no one spoke. This was Castellanos. Here, people did not interfere in other people's business. Here, they lowered their heads, looked elsewhere, and pretended not to see until it was over. Those were the rules. That was how people survived. Tony, the manager, stood behind the register watching with worried eyes. He knew who Derek Lawson was. He knew Derek belonged to the Moretti crew and that trouble would follow if things escalated. But he also knew he had no authority to intervene, no power to stand up to a man like Derek. All he could do was stand there and hope the storm would pass without leaving damage behind. Amelia stood still, waiting. She did not retreat, did not show fear, but she did not challenge him either. She simply stood there with the calm of someone who had walked through hell and knew this was not yet the worst life could throw at her. Derek stared at her for a few more seconds, then waved her off with contempt. "Go on, but don't go far. I'm not done with you yet." Amelia turned and walked away, her heart beating faster than usual, though her steps remained even. She knew the night was not over. She knew that man would not stop until he got whatever it was he wanted. But she also knew she was no longer the fragile girl she had been 3 years ago. She had survived Richard Hayes. She would survive this man too. 45 minutes passed in the kind of unspoken tension the entire diner felt but no one dared to acknowledge. Amelia kept working, moving between the tables with intense focus, doing her best not to notice the gaze burning into her back from the corner booth behind her. She hoped that if she continued to ignore him, the man would grow bored and leave, like so many others before him. But Derek Lawson was not the kind of man who knew how to walk away. His ego would not allow it. He rose from the booth at 9:15 in the evening, the scrape of his chair against the tiled floor loud enough to make a few people turn their heads before quickly looking away. Derek did not hurry. He adjusted the collar of his black shirt, smoothed a wrinkle that was not there, then began walking toward the counter where Amelia was standing and sorting receipts. Every step he took was deliberate, carrying an unmasked threat. Amelia sensed him approaching before she saw him. She had learned to feel danger closing in during the years she lived with Richard, when the difference between noticing the signs early or late could mean the difference between a slap and a beating that left her barely alive. She did not turn around right away. She kept arranging the receipts with hands that were surprisingly steady, only turning when Derek's shadow fell across the counter in front of her. He stood closer than necessary, close enough that she could smell cheap cologne and whiskey on his breath. It was a tactic she recognized, invading personal space to make the other person feel small, threatened, controlled. Richard had done the same thing hundreds of times before his hand ever rose. Amelia did not step back. She stood still, her gaze fixed on the front of Derek's shirt, refusing to lift her eyes to meet his, as if that were a privilege she would not grant him. The silence stretched for a few seconds, long enough for Derek to realize she had no intention of speaking first, and that realization only fueled his anger. "Who do you think you are?" Derek said in a low, threatening voice meant only for her. "You think you can ignore me all night without consequences? Do you know who I am?" Amelia drew in a slow breath. She knew the safest answer. She should lower her head, apologize, play the weak girl, and give him a small victory for his wounded ego. That was how she had survived with Richard. That was how she had endured 6 years in the orphanage. But something inside her had shifted the night she fled Philadelphia. She was tired. Tired of bowing her head. Tired of shrinking herself to appease men like Derek Lawson and Richard Hayes. Tired of living like a shadow in her own life. She lifted her head and met Derek's eyes for the first time. There was no fear there, no challenge. Only the absolute calm of someone who had walked through hell and knew nothing this world could offer was worse than what she had already survived. "I hear you," she said evenly, without a tremor, "but I need to get back to work." Derek's face changed. He had expected fear. He had expected tears. He had expected her to beg or at least retreat in visible terror. What he received instead was indifference, pure and flawless indifference, as if he were not worth even a second of her concern. And that was something Derek Lawson's ego could not endure. He had spent his life making others afraid. He had built his reputation on the terror in the eyes of those weaker than him. He needed to be feared the way others needed air. And now a small waitress with sad eyes and a yellow apron was looking at him as if he were nothing more than a cockroach on the floor. Unpleasant but not worth the energy to crush. Derek's jaw clenched so hard the muscles bunched beneath his skin. His eyes darkened, the earlier cold calculation replaced by the raw flame of rage. In that moment, Amelia knew she had gone too far. She had touched something she should not have touched. She had awakened a monster she should have left sleeping. But it was too late to turn back. Too late to lower her head and apologize. A wounded beast always bites back. "You will regret this," Derek hissed through clenched teeth. "I swear you will regret it." And then everything happened too fast. Derek's hand seized Amelia's hair before she could react, his fingers tightening around the brown strands and yanking her head back with brutal force, wrenching her neck into a painful angle as a choked sound tore from her throat, and her hands rose instinctively to pry him off. But Derek was too strong. He was always too strong. They always were. And the entire diner froze in a surreal instant as plates stopped clinking. Cups halted halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence as if someone had pressed pause on a film. Everyone saw what was happening, and what was about to happen, yet no one moved, and no one spoke. Because this was Castellanos, and at Castellanos people did not intervene. They looked away, they pretended not to see. They left the victim to fend for herself, and prayed they would not be next. Tony, the manager, opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. A woman near the door covered her mouth with trembling fingers. A man at the counter slowly turned his stool away, refusing to be a witness, and their silence rang louder than any scream as Derek hissed in Amelia's face, his breath heavy with alcohol against her cheek, asking if she thought she could disrespect him and who she thought she was to look at him that way, vowing to teach her what respect meant. And Amelia did not beg because she had begged Richard enough to know it never worked. She only looked at Derek with wide eyes, not from fear, but from the aching acceptance of someone long accustomed to violence, knowing this was not the first time a man had grabbed her hair, and likely not the last, wondering if this was her fate to be crushed again and again until nothing remained. Then Derek's other hand rose, and she saw it in slow motion, fingers curling, muscles tensing, the arm swinging forward, and she closed her eyes in the instant before impact, not from fear, but because she did not want to see the triumphant look on his face as he did what he was about to do. The impact exploded like a gunshot, shattering her world in an instant, and tearing through the silence of Castellano's diner, and carving itself into the memory of everyone present that night. As her head snapped to the side, her cheek flared with pain, the world reeled. Derek released her hair with the blow, and she had nothing left to hold on to. She fell onto the cold tiled floor, her head striking the edge of the counter as she went down, and everything began to blur. Blood seeped from her split lip, and dotted the black and white tiles like red petals opening in hell as Amelia lay still, consciousness drifting away like a boat lost in fog, hearing the noise around her as if from another world. Whispers. chairs scraping, someone crying, all distant and unreal, while Derek stood over her, chest heaving with excitement, eyes bright with the sick satisfaction of a man who believed he had reasserted his power, smiling down at her unmoving body, and utterly unaware of the shift in the air behind him, not hearing the bell as the front door opened, not seeing the customers' faces change from fear to pure horror, not sensing the room draw tight as if the walls themselves were recoiling from what was about to come, not knowing that the man who had just crossed the threshold was Vincent Castellano, the owner of this diner, the boss of Brooklyn's underworld, and the one man in this city who did not believe in second chances. Vincent Castellano did not just see the blood. He smelled the violation of his sanctuary the moment he crossed the threshold. Red drops against the black and white tiles. Red drops against the black and white tiles, stark as an accusation that could not be denied. Then he saw the girl lying motionless on the floor, brown hair spread like a dark halo, blood seeping from her split lip. And finally, he saw the man standing over her with the triumphant smile of someone who believed he had conquered something. And he recognized Derek Lawson instantly, a low-level errand runner for the Moretti crew, the kind of sewer rat Vincent would not normally bother with. But today was not a normal day. Today, blood had been spilled on his floor, in the diner his grandfather had built, in the sanctuary 3 generations of Castellanos had defended with blood and iron. Today, the rules had been broken, and Vincent Castellano was the only one with the right to pass judgment. He said nothing as he entered because he did not need to. His presence alone was enough to change everything in the room, as customers trying to make themselves invisible suddenly held their breath. Tony behind the register went pale, as if death itself had just walked through the door. The air thickened, heavy enough to feel against the skin. And Derek, foolish Derek, still had no idea what was happening, still savoring his small victory, still looking down at the unconscious girl with sick satisfaction, not seeing how every face in the room had turned toward the door, not seeing the terror in their eyes, terror not for him but for what was about to happen to him. Vincent moved forward, each step deliberate, carrying the weight of a sentence already decided. He did not hurry because he did not need to. Prey cannot run when it does not yet know it is being hunted. His black leather shoes struck the tile in steady rhythm, the only sound in the diner's absolute silence, step after step like a countdown to the end of the world, until at last Derek sensed something, perhaps a survival instinct screaming in his head, perhaps the shift in the air that even a fool could not ignore. He turned, the smile still on his lips, ready to face whoever dared challenge him. And then he saw Vincent Castellano standing right behind him, and the smile froze as if ice water had been poured through his veins. Color drained from Derek's face with startling speed. His eyes widened, pupils shrinking to pinpoints. His mouth opened, perhaps to explain, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg, but Vincent gave him no chance. "Move," Vincent said. A single word, his voice not loud, not threatening, not angry, simply cold, cold as steel, cold as a grave, and within that cold lay a promise of pain, of regret, of death. Derek did not move, perhaps too terrified to do so, perhaps nailed to the floor by pure horror, perhaps his foolish ego still whispering that he could somehow escape this. Whatever the reason, it was the last mistake of his night. What followed took less than 3 seconds as Vincent moved with a speed no one expected from a man so composed, a punch to the ribs folding Derek over with a strangled sound. And before he could recover, Vincent's knee drove into his face, the sharp crack of breaking bone ringing through the silence as Derek collapsed like a sack of potatoes, blood spraying from his nose, eyes rolling back, utterly helpless. The power he had reveled in moments earlier, stripped away in an instant, as swiftly as he had stripped the dignity from the girl lying unconscious a few steps away. Vincent stood over Derek as Derek had stood over Amelia, but there was no triumph in his eyes, only the coldness of justice, the ruthlessness of a man accustomed to judging and executing, and he looked down at the groaning figure beneath him the way one looks at an insect before crushing it. And no one in the diner dared to breathe. Vincent did not spare Derek Lawson another second. Stepping over the groaning body on the floor, as if it were trash, and dropping to one knee beside Amelia, his eyes that had been ice cold when fixed on his enemy now holding something different as he looked at the unconscious girl. Not tenderness, because Vincent Castellano did not do tenderness, but perhaps concern, a rare and focused attention he seldom granted anyone. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck to find a pulse, her skin pale and cool beneath the diner's yellow lights, yet beneath it her heart still beat, weak but steady, resilient, like the woman herself. "She is breathing," Vincent said, his voice carrying through the diner, still trapped in silence. "Call an ambulance, now." and his order shattered the frozen moment, holding the room as Tony moved first. Trembling hands, fumbling for his phone and dialing 911. A woman near the door burst into tears, perhaps from relief, perhaps from shame at having done nothing while tragedy unfolded before her eyes. A man pushed back from the counter as if waking from a nightmare, and hurried outside to breathe air no longer thick with violence. Vincent stayed where he was, shrugging out of his black jacket and carefully placing it beneath Amelia's head to keep her from the cold tile. A small, almost insignificant gesture that nonetheless made several people look at him twice because they knew who Vincent Castellano was and what he did to those who crossed him, but they had never seen him show care like this for anyone, least of all a new waitress whose name he did not even know. Derek tried to sit up in the corner, blood still streaming from his broken nose, eyes wild like a trapped animal, his mouth opening perhaps to beg, perhaps to explain, but one look from Vincent silenced him, a look that promised far worse than a broken nose if he spoke again. Two of Vincent's men appeared as if from nowhere. Perhaps they had been there all along, perhaps they had just been summoned, and they hauled Derek to his feet without ceremony, holding him fast with iron arms as he offered no resistance, understanding at last that he had gambled and lost and now had to pay, the only question being how high the price would be. Take him to the basement, Vincent said without turning. I will be down shortly. Derek was dragged away, his weak pleas swallowed by the slam of the back door, and the diner seemed to lose 10 kilograms as he vanished, the air easing slightly, though tension still lingered. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Vincent remained kneeling beside Amelia, one hand hovering near her shoulder, as if to shield her from anything else that might come, studying her face in the yellow light, the bruise blooming on her cheek, the dried blood at her split lip, his jaw tightening as he took it in. He had seen brutality, committed more of it than most, yet something about this girl, the way she had faced Derek without trembling, the way she had refused to bend even knowing the cost, stirred something he had believed long dead in his chest. The ambulance pulled up outside, red and blue lights flashing through the windows like a rhythmic heartbeats. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and equipment, and Vincent finally stood back to give them room, watching as they stabilized her neck, lifted her onto the stretcher, checked her pupils and blood pressure, speaking of possible concussion, of the need to get her to a hospital immediately, of how lucky she was to still be breathing. Lucky. Vincent nearly laughed at the word, because looking at her, at the sadness in her eyes and the faint scar near her temple he had just noticed, he had the sense that luck was something she had never known. When the stretcher rolled out and the ambulance doors closed, Vincent stood in the doorway watching until the lights disappeared down the street. Behind him, Castellano's diner finally exhaled for the first time all night, as murmured conversations cautiously resumed. Tony scrubbed blood from the floor with shaking hands. Some customers rose and left, unwilling to remain another second in a place that had witnessed too much. Vincent turned back, his gaze sweeping the room once more. His grandfather's diner, his family's legacy, neutral ground violated. He knew the night would change everything. That word of what had happened would race through Brooklyn's underworld before dawn, and that he had to go to the basement to finish what Derek Lawson had begun. But first he needed to know the name of the girl. Amelia drifted in a formless darkness, not knowing where she was, how much time had passed, or whether she was alive or dead, as fragments of memory spun around her like shards of glass in a storm, each reflecting a moment of pain, the slap cracking like a breaking branch, the cold tile against her back, blood in her mouth with the taste of iron and salt, and before that older memories forced their way in uninvited, Richard's hands tightening around her throat in the dark kitchen, the leather belt cutting across her back, the sound of a rib cracking on the night she tried to run for the first time, all of it blending into a nightmare with no beginning and no end, until she heard voices from somewhere far away, overlapping and disjointed, sharp and muffled at once, as if she were listening from beneath the surface of water. Someone calling her name, someone crying, someone issuing urgent orders, and she tried to reach for those sounds to pull herself out of the dark, but her body would not obey. Heavy as stone, as lead, as all the years of suffering pressing down on her chest at once, then a moment of light pierced through, blinding and painful, and Amelia tried to open her eyes, but her lids felt weighted as if coins had been placed upon them. She tried again and again until the world returned in pieces. Cold white lights on the ceiling, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the steady beeping of a monitor somewhere beside her. A hospital. She was in a hospital. A thought that should have brought relief, but instead left her more confused. Why was she here? What had happened? She tried to remember, but memory slipped through her grasp like sand. The tighter she held, the faster it ran. and then she saw a figure. A man sitting in a chair beside her bed. Large, broad-shouldered, his face lost in the shadows of the dim room. Watching her, and even without seeing his features, she could feel his gaze. And in her mind, distorted by pain medication and trauma, that shape turned into a nightmare. Derek, the thought cut through her like a cold blade. He had found her, followed her to the hospital. He would finish what he had started. Or worse. Perhaps it was not Derek at all. Perhaps it was Richard, the husband she had fled 6 months earlier. Richard, who had sworn he would find her wherever she ran. Richard, who had said that if he could not have her, then no one would. Panic surged in Amelia's chest like a rising tide. Her heart raced, and the monitor began to shriek its alarm. She tried to sit up, but her body refused, pain exploding in her head as if a hammer had struck her temple. She did not care. She had to get away. She had to run. She could not let them catch her again. No, her voice came out hoarse and weak, yet filled with raw terror. No, please do not. Do not come near me. The man stood up and Amelia screamed, the sound tearing from her throat and echoing through the sterile hospital room as she threw her arms up to shield her face and curled inward into a small ball the way she had done hundreds of times before when Richard raised his hand. Do not hit me, she sobbed, tears streaming down her cheeks without her noticing. Please do not hit me again. I am sorry. I will do anything. Please stop. The man halted immediately, not stepping closer, not speaking, standing there in silence like a statue. But Amelia did not see that. She was somewhere else, some other time, trapped in memories, dragged up from deep within by the medication. She saw the Philadelphia kitchen with blood smeared on the walls. She saw Richard standing over her with the belt in his hand. She saw the orphanage with children crowding around and laughing at her in a dark corner. 15 years of hell folding into a single moment and swallowing her whole. The hospital room door burst open and nurses and doctors rushed in like a flood. Someone gently but firmly moved the man farther away. Someone else tried to keep Amelia still as she thrashed and cried. A calm female voice spoke soothing words into her ear that she could not understand. Then a cold sensation spread from her arm as a sedative flowed into her vein, and the world began to blur again, and just before the darkness fully claimed her, Amelia heard the strange man's voice speaking to a nurse, low, controlled, carrying something she could not name in her dazed state. She thinks I am the one who did this to her, he said. I will wait outside. Call me when she wakes and is calmer. Then footsteps receded, the door closed, and Amelia slipped into a dreamless sleep. When Amelia woke for the second time, the light beyond the window had shifted to the pale gray of dawn, and she lay still for a long while staring at the stark white ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of memory scattered through her mind, the pain still there, throbbing dully behind her temples like a second heartbeat but no longer blinding as before. The medication having done its work, or perhaps she had simply grown accustomed to pain. She recalled the night like a bad dream. The diner, Derek, the slap, the cold tile, and then the hospital. The shadow of a man in the corner of the room. The panic that had swallowed her whole. She remembered screaming, remembered begging not to be hit. And now in the cold clarity of morning, she felt a shame so deep she wanted to disappear into the hospital bed. A nurse entered quietly, perhaps to avoid startling her. A middle-aged woman with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering to be shocked by anything anymore. She smiled when she saw Amelia awake, checked the monitor, wrote something on the chart, then pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. How are you feeling? She asked gently, as if speaking to a frightened child. Amelia swallowed, her throat dry and raw. I do not know. Maybe alive. The nurse nodded with understanding written across her face. You have a mild concussion and a cut on your lip. Nothing too serious physically, but I think you have been through more than just last night. Have you not? Amelia did not answer because she did not need to. The scars on her back, the old fading bruises on her arms, the way she curled inward when afraid, told a story without words. The man last night, Amelia finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man who was in the room when I woke up. Who is he? That is what I wanted to tell you. The nurse replied with a strange smile, half surprise and half admiration. That man is not the one who did this to you. He is the one who saved you. Amelia blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. Saved me? Yes. His name is Vincent Castellano. He is the owner of the diner where you work. From what I was told, he walked in at exactly the right moment and stopped the man who attacked you before he could do anything worse. He called the ambulance. He rode with it to the hospital, and he sat here all night until you woke up and panicked. The words took time to sink in. Vincent Castellano. The name was familiar. She had heard the other staff mention it with a mix of fear and respect. The boss, the man no one dared speak of too loudly, and he had saved her. He had sat beside her hospital bed all night, and she had screamed at him, begged him not to hit her, treated him like a monster when he was the only one who had protected her. "Oh God," Amelia whispered, lifting a hand to cover her face. "I thought he was the one who hurt me. I thought he was my ex-husband." I screamed and begged like a madwoman. The nurse placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "You suffered a severe trauma and were under the influence of strong medication. No one blames you for reacting that way. And I think he understands that. He was not angry when he left. He was only worried about you." Amelia lowered her hand and looked at the nurse, with uncertainty in her eyes. "Why? I am just a waitress who has been there less than a week. Why would someone like him care about me?" The nurse was quiet for a moment as if weighing her answer. "I do not know what kind of man he is," she said at last. "I only know what I saw, and what I saw was a man who sat by your bed all night without sleeping. A man who asked the doctors about your condition so many times they asked me to step in and reassure him. A man who did not protest when you screamed at him but stepped back so you would feel safe. Whoever he is, whatever he has done in his past. Last night he was the only person who stood up for you when no one else dared to." Amelia lay still, staring at the ceiling as those words seeped into her. She was used to being betrayed, used to those who promised to protect her becoming the ones who hurt her the most. She had built the walls around her heart so high she believed no one could climb them. But last night, a stranger had done what no one had ever done for her before. He had stepped in. He had protected her. He had stayed when he had no reason to, and she had pushed him away with screams and tears. "Is he still here?" Amelia asked softly. The nurse nodded. "He is waiting in the hallway. He said he will not come in until you are ready and agree to see him." Amelia closed her eyes and drew a slow breath. She did not know if she was ready. She did not know if she would ever be ready to face the man she had treated so cruelly. But she knew she owed him at least an apology, and Amelia Hayes, no matter how many times life had crushed her, was someone who paid her debts. Vincent stepped into the hospital room 10 minutes after the nurse left, knocking first, a courtesy Amelia had not expected from a man she had heard whispered about as the most feared boss in Brooklyn, and he waited until she said "come in" before opening the door, even then pausing at the threshold as if giving her time to change her mind. And Amelia studied him in daylight for the first time, with a mind clear enough to truly see. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered, carrying the posture of a man accustomed to bearing weight both literal and unseen. The tattoo at his throat rising above the collar of a white shirt he must have changed into sometime during the night, dark lines curling like warnings written in a language she could not read. But what held her attention most were his eyes. Not cold as she had imagined a mafia boss's eyes would be, but tired, cautious, and carrying something she could not quite name, perhaps concern, perhaps curiosity, perhaps both. "May I come in?" Vincent asked, his voice low and restrained, neither threatening nor overly familiar. And Amelia nodded because she did not trust her voice in that moment. Vincent entered but did not take the chair beside her bed as he had the night before. Instead, he stopped at a careful distance, leaning back against the wall with his arms folded, the stance of a man deliberately making himself smaller, less intimidating. And Amelia realized he was doing it for her, giving her space, giving her control. "I am sorry," Amelia said before the silence could stretch any further, her voice hoarse and weak but the words sincere. "About last night, about what I said, I did not know it was you. I thought you were the man who attacked me, or worse." Vincent looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You do not need to apologize," he said. "You were assaulted by one man and woke up to find another man sitting beside your bed in the dark. Your reaction was entirely reasonable, but you are not that man. You saved me. I am the owner of the diner where you work. Protecting my employees is my responsibility. There is nothing to thank me for." Amelia shook her head slightly, the movement sending a sharp reminder of pain through her temple. "No. I have worked enough places to know that most bosses would not have done what you did. Most would have looked away. Most would have said it was not their problem. You did not do that. You walked in and you acted. And that matters to me." Vincent said nothing, but something shifted in his eyes. A fleeting softness he quickly masked. He pushed away from the wall and moved to the chair, sitting this time as if he had decided she was no longer afraid of him, or at least not as afraid as before. "The nurse said you have been through more than just last night," he said, his tone without judgment, simply stating a fact. "You do not have to tell me anything if you do not want to, but if there is someone out there looking for you, I need to know." Amelia looked down at her hands resting on the hospital blanket, thin fingers marked with calluses from years of hard work. She had kept her past secret for 6 months, told no one, trusted no one, allowed no one close enough to know the truth. But this man had saved her, sat by her bed all night, had not been angry when she screamed at him. Perhaps he deserved at least part of the story. "My ex-husband," she began, her voice so quiet it was nearly a whisper. "Richard Hayes. I was married to him for 3 years. He hit me, controlled me, isolated me. 6 months ago he nearly killed me and I ran. I came to New York because I thought I could disappear here. I thought he would never find me." She paused, drawing in a shaky breath. "Last night when I woke up and saw your shadow in the room, I did not think about the man at the diner. I thought about Richard. I thought he had found me. I thought he was going to finish what he started 6 months ago. That is why I reacted the way I did. That is why I screamed." Vincent listened without interrupting, his face carefully neutral though his eyes told another story. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, as if weighing every word she had spoken. "Does he know where you are?" he asked at last. "Richard, does he know you are in New York?" "I do not think so," Amelia replied. "I have been careful. I changed everything. My name, my phone number, my address. I have not contacted anyone from my old life." Vincent nodded slowly. "Good. Keep it that way. And if he appears, if you see him or hear anything about him, I want you to tell me immediately." Amelia looked at him with undisguised surprise. "Why? Why do you care? Why would you want to involve yourself in the mess my life has become?" Vincent met her gaze, and this time he did not hide what was in his eyes. "Because no one deserves to spend their life running," he said, "and because I have the means to make sure you do not have to do that anymore." Amelia did not know how to respond to that offer, because she was used to taking care of herself, used to relying on no one, used to believing that promises from men were nothing more than nooses disguised as kindness. Yet there was something in the way Vincent spoke, in the certainty of his voice that carried no arrogance, that made her want to believe him, and that desire to believe frightened her more than anything else. "Who are you?" she asked, not because she did not know, but because she wanted to hear it from his own mouth. "I have heard the rumors, but rumors are not the truth." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the window, where the sky was shifting from gray to pale blue. He was silent for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal and how much to keep buried. Then he began to speak, his voice low and steady, as though he were telling a story about someone else rather than himself. "I am the 3rd generation of the Castellano family. My grandfather immigrated from Sicily to Brooklyn in the year 1965, with nothing but his hands, and a dream. America never truly offered men like him. He built this empire from nothing, with blood, with sweat, with choices. Ordinary people would call crimes. My father inherited it and expanded it, turning a small crew into one of the city's most powerful forces. And I was born into this world. I never had a choice." He looked back at her, his eyes unflinching. "I have done things that would disgust you if you knew them. I have given orders that cost other people their lives. I built my reputation on fear, because in my world fear is the only thing that keeps order. I am not a good man, Amelia. I do not pretend to be. But I have principles, and one of those principles is protecting those who belong to me." Amelia listened without interrupting, letting his words soak in like rain into parched earth. She was not afraid of what he said. Perhaps she had endured too much to fear, abstractions like power and crime. She feared only hands that could truly touch her, men who could truly hurt her, and the man before her, whoever he was and whatever he had done, had not hurt her. He had protected her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve to know who you are dealing with before you make any decision," Vincent replied. "And because I am about to make you an offer, and I want you to understand who it comes from." "What offer?" Vincent stood, walked to the window, and looked out as morning light traced the hard lines of his face and the shadows beneath his eyes from a night without sleep. "You will be discharged in a day or 2. Where will you go?" "Back to my room," Amelia answered, even as she knew how small and pitiful it sounded. The weekly room in the most dangerous part of Brooklyn, the room with a broken lock and addicted neighbors, the room anyone determined enough could find. "I have an apartment," Vincent said without turning. "Not where I live, but one of the properties I own. It is secure, with protection around the clock, and no one enters without permission. I want you to stay there until you are fully recovered." Amelia felt as if the air had been pulled from her lungs. "I cannot accept that. I cannot pay rent for a place like that, and I do not want to owe anyone anything. There is no rent and there are no conditions." Vincent finally turned, his gaze fixed on her with an earnestness that could not be denied. This is not an exchange, and it is not a trap. I want nothing from you. I am offering a safe place where you can get back on your feet without worrying that someone will break in at midnight. You can leave whenever you want. You can refuse right now and I will never bring it up again. But at least think about it. Amelia wanted to refuse. Every survival instinct she had built over 15 years was screaming that this was a trap, that nothing was free, that powerful men never give without taking. Richard had been kind at first too. Richard had promised to protect her as well. But when she looked into Vincent's eyes, she did not see what she had seen in Richard's. She did not see possession. She did not see control disguised as care. She saw only a tired man trying to do something right in a world where right was a luxury. "Give me time to think," she said at last. Vincent nodded as if that were the answer he expected. "Take all the time you need. I will come back tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, until you have an answer or until you tell me to leave, whichever comes first." He smiled for the first time since entering the room, a small, weary but genuine smile. Then he left without another word, leaving Amelia alone with her tangled thoughts and a decision she knew would change everything. Amelia accepted Vincent's offer after 3 days of deliberation and moved into the apartment on the 12th floor of a luxury building in Manhattan. A place more beautiful than anywhere she had ever set foot in, with wide windows opening onto the city skyline, polished wooden floors, minimalist yet expensive furnishings, and she felt out of place there, like a stain on pristine white cloth. Yet for the first time in many years she also felt safe, with round-the-clock security in the lobby, cameras at every corner, and a steel door with 3 layers of locks standing between her and the outside world. And she began to think that perhaps, just perhaps, she could stop running. 2 weeks passed in quiet peace. The cut on her lip healed, leaving only a small scar she would carry for life. The bruise on her cheek faded from purple to yellow and then vanished. She slept through the night without waking from nightmares, a miracle she had never believed possible. Vincent visited every day, sometimes only to check whether she needed anything, sometimes staying for hours to talk. And they grew accustomed to each other's presence, something Amelia did not dare to name. Then on the morning of the 15th day, everything collapsed. She was making coffee in the kitchen when her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Only 5 words, yet enough to freeze the blood in her veins. "I have found you." She dropped the coffee mug. It shattered across the wooden floor, hot liquid splashing her legs, though she felt nothing. She stood there staring at the screen as the world dissolved into a familiar nightmare, realizing with a jolt of horror that while she had typed in her new delivery address for the book she ordered yesterday, she had forgotten that the account was still linked to their old shared email. The order confirmation, displaying her exact location, had been sent straight to the inbox. Richard still monitored. The phone vibrated again. "Did you think you could hide from me?" Again. "I am in the lobby." Again. "Come down now, or I will come up." Amelia did not know how she called Vincent. Her fingers moved across the screen with a will of their own, and then his voice came through the line. Low and calm as always. She tried to speak, but only sobs escaped. The sobs of a 12-year-old who had lost her parents, of an 18-year-old stepping out of an orphanage with $20, of a 27-year-old woman who had believed she had escaped. "He is here," she whispered. "Richard. He found me. He is in the lobby." "Stay where you are," Vincent said, his tone unchanged, yet something harder beneath the surface. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone. I will be there in 10 minutes. Vincent arrived in 7. Amelia knew because she counted every second. Curled in the corner of the living room with the small knife she had carried from Philadelphia. The only pitiful weapon between her and the nightmare waiting outside the door. She heard the elevator stop, footsteps in the hallway, then a knock. "Amelia," Vincent's voice. She was unlocking the door when she heard another voice farther down the corridor. A voice she would recognize even after 100 years. "So this is the bastard you are sleeping with." Richard Hayes stood at the end of the hallway, tall and handsome as she remembered, with the charming smile she had once loved and the cold eyes she had learned to fear. He had shadowed a furniture delivery crew through the busy service entrance, slipping into the open freight elevator behind them and waiting in the corner while they used their access card to secure the 12th floor. He stepped out when they did, unnoticed in the chaos of moving boxes. He walked forward with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the place, who believed he owned her. "You thought you could leave me, Amelia. You thought you could run to New York and play whore with a gangster and I would forget you." Vincent stepped between Richard and the apartment door, blocking Richard's view of Amelia entirely. He said nothing, simply stood there with the terrifying calm of a man who had seen and done things Richard Hayes could not imagine in his worst nightmares. "Who the hell are you?" Richard snarled. "Move aside. She is my wife." Vincent still did not speak. He only looked at Richard, and something in that gaze made Richard stop. It was not the loud threat Richard was used to. It was the silence of a predator deciding whether the prey before it was worth killing. "I will say this once," Vincent finally said, his voice deep as distant thunder. "She is not your wife anymore. She is nothing of yours anymore. You will leave this building right now. You will leave this city before midnight, and you will never try to contact her again." Richard laughed, but the sound was strained. "Who do you think you are to give me orders? I am Vincent Castellano, and if you do not know what that name means, you can ask anyone in this city's underworld. They will explain why this is the last sunrise you will ever see if you do not do exactly what I just told you." Richard's face changed, his confidence crumbling into something Amelia had never seen on him before. Fear. He looked at Vincent, then at the two men who had just stepped out of the elevator behind him, large men with expressionless faces and hands resting in their coat pockets. Richard swallowed, cast one last look at Amelia filled with hatred, then turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the elevator. And as Amelia watched his back vanish, for the first time in 3 years she felt the nightmare called Richard Hayes finally come to an end. The weeks after Richard disappeared were the most peaceful Amelia had ever known. For the first time in 15 years she woke each morning without fear. For the first time she could step outside without constantly glancing over her shoulder. For the first time she could breathe without feeling as though invisible hands were tightening around her throat from afar. Freedom tasted sweeter than she had imagined, and she drank it in like someone dying of thirst who had finally found an oasis in the desert. Vincent continued to visit her every day, yet something had shifted between them after the night he faced Richard. Their conversations grew longer. The silences between them became comfortable rather than awkward. No longer gaps that needed filling, but a shared space where both felt safe. Amelia began to see pieces of Vincent he kept hidden from the world. He brought her books, classic novels he said he had read dozens of times. He told her about his grandmother, the Sicilian woman who taught him how to cook when he was a boy, and the only person who ever scolded him even after he became a boss. He confessed that he loved jazz, that he owned a vinyl collection he told no one about, that on nights when he could not sleep he sometimes sat alone listening to Chet Baker sing about broken hearts. This was not the image of a mafia boss Amelia had imagined. This was a man, complex and full of contradictions, lonely in a way only those who carried too much weight could understand, and she realized she wanted to know more about him, wanted to see the corners he never showed anyone, wanted to be the person before whom he could set down his armor and simply be Vincent. One evening he arrived with a bottle of red wine and ingredients to make pasta using his grandmother's recipe. They stood side by side in the small kitchen, shoulders brushing as he showed her how to prepare tomato sauce the traditional Sicilian way. Amelia laughed for the first time in months. A real unforced laugh, when she spilled flour all over the counter. Vincent looked at her with an expression she did not dare interpret, then reached out and gently brushed a streak of white flour from her cheek. His fingers were warm and rough against her skin, and Amelia stopped breathing. They stood there so close she could hear his heartbeat. So close, his breath brushed lightly against her forehead. Time seemed to pause. The kitchen fell away. The world shrank to just the two of them, and the fragile space between their lips. Amelia knew she should step back, knew she should say something to break the moment before it became something she could not control. She had sworn to herself she would never let a man come this close again, had built the walls around her heart so high she believed no one could climb them. But Vincent did not try to climb her walls. He simply stood there, patient, waiting for her to open the gate herself. And tonight, in a kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and basil, with flour on her cheek and wine warming her blood, Amelia decided that perhaps it was time to stop being afraid. She was the one who closed the distance, the one who rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. Their first kiss was not fierce or consuming like the ones she had seen in films. It was gentle and tentative, like a question whispered between two souls long accustomed to pain. Vincent did not push her away, and he did not pull her closer. He simply stood there, letting her lead, letting her decide how far she wanted to go. And that respect, that patience, was what finally shattered the last remaining fragments of the wall Amelia had built over 15 years. When they parted, she looked into his eyes and saw something she had thought she had forgotten how to recognize: tenderness, care, and something deeper and more frightening that neither of them was ready to name. "I do not know what I am doing," Amelia whispered. "Neither do I," Vincent replied. "But I want to find out with you." That night they ate cold pasta and finished the bottle of wine. sitting side by side on the sofa, with shoulders touching and fingers intertwined. They did not speak of the future. They made no promises. They simply stayed there together. Two broken souls learning how to heal in each other's presence. 1 month after their first kiss, Amelia told Vincent that she wanted to return to Castellano's diner. He was sitting across from her in the apartment with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand, and she caught the brief flicker of surprise in his eyes before he concealed it. He did not ask why. He did not try to persuade her to change her mind. He simply studied her for a long moment, and then nodded, as though he understood something she did not need to put into words. But Amelia explained anyway because she needed to hear herself say the reasons out loud in order to believe they were real. "I do not want that place to be where I was finally defeated," she said. "I do not want my last memory of Castellanos to be lying on the tiled floor with blood in my mouth. I want to go back and rewrite that story. I want to prove to myself that I am stronger than what was done to me." Vincent set the cup down and reached across the table to take her hand. "Are you sure? No one would think less of you if you never set foot in that place again." Amelia smiled, the first smile in many years that felt wholly her own. "I know, but I would think less of myself." She returned to Castellanos on a Tuesday evening, almost 2 months after that fateful night. When she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, the entire diner seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. Familiar faces turned toward her, their expressions layered with emotions she could not fully read. Surprise, curiosity, guilt, shame. She knew exactly what they were thinking. They remembered that night. They remembered sitting still while Derek pulled her hair. They remembered looking away when the slap cracked like a breaking branch. They wondered whether she had come back to judge them. But Amelia was not there to judge. She was there to heal, both herself and this place. She tied on the familiar yellow apron, smoothing each fold the way she had on her first night, and began to work. She moved between tables with steady steps, took orders, poured coffee, cleared plates. Yet something in the way she carried herself was different. She no longer lowered her head. She no longer avoided eye contact. She no longer tried to make herself invisible. The scar near her temple had faded from pink to silver, and she did not hide it. She let it remain visible as a reminder of what she had survived. In the weeks that followed, Amelia began to change Castellanos in ways no one expected, not through declarations or speeches, but through small, resolute actions that could not be ignored. When a drunk man began harassing a new waitress, Amelia stepped forward and placed herself between them. She met his gaze with a calm she had paid for with 15 years of suffering. "You need to stop," she said, her voice not loud but firm as steel. "Right now." The man looked at her, then at the scar on her temple, then around the room as though searching for support. But this time no one looked away. This time everyone was looking directly at him, and in their eyes was something that had not been there before. Judgment, warning, readiness to act if necessary. The man muttered something and left, and Castellanos exhaled once more. But this time, it was not the breath of relief that comes from avoiding trouble. It was the breath of change. Slowly the culture of the diner began to shift. Men who once spoke too loudly learned to lower their voices. Crude remarks that had once been ignored were now met with cold stares from other patrons. The silence that had once shielded cruelty became a weapon against it. Amelia did not do this alone. She saw other staff members begin to stand straighter, speak more clearly, refuse to accept mistreatment as normal. She saw regular customers start to speak up when something felt wrong instead of staring down at their plates. She saw Tony, the manager, finally ask a customer to leave for inappropriate behavior, something he had never done in 20 years of working there. One night after closing, Vincent sat at the counter watching Amelia wipe down tables. "You changed this place," he said. "You did too," she replied. He shook his head slightly. "I only enforced something. You embodied it." Amelia stopped and looked at him with eyes that now knew how to meet another's without fear. "People think strength looks like domination," she said. "They think it is loud and violent. But real strength looks like restraint, like knowing when to step in and when to stand firm, like refusing to let fear define you." Vincent held her gaze, and in his eyes was something she was beginning to learn how to name. Love, not the blazing, consuming kind she had once known with Richard, but a steady, enduring love built on respect and understanding, on long conversations and shared silences. A love that did not demand her disappearance but welcomed her fully into the light. Castellano's diner looked like any other ordinary night as Amelia stepped onto the sidewalk after closing. The lights were off, the chairs stacked on tables, the black and white tiled floor scrubbed clean of every trace of a long day. From the outside, no one could guess what had happened within these walls. No one could know that this place had once witnessed spilled blood and cowardly silence, And then, later, rebirth and courage. But those who had been there knew, and they would never forget. Vincent was waiting for her on the corner as he did every night, hands tucked into his coat pockets, his figure blending into the shadows of the city yet standing out in the quiet way of men born to be noticed. He smiled when he saw her approach. A small, private smile meant only for her, and Amelia felt her heart warm, as it always did at the sight of it. They walked side by side, in comfortable silence, shoulders brushing, steps in rhythm. The city moved around them, indifferent yet alive, millions of stories unfolding at once, in millions of rooms they would never know. But their story, the one that began with a slap that cracked like a breaking branch and ended with shared footsteps on a nighttime sidewalk, belonged only to them. What happens next? Amelia asked as they stopped at an intersection waiting for the light to change. She was not asking about tonight or tomorrow, but about the future, about the long years ahead that for the first time in her life she dared to imagine. Vincent turned to her, his eyes deep beneath the streetlights. "That depends on what you want," he said. "You have seen my world. You have felt its weight. If you choose to walk away, I will understand. But if you choose to stay, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that decision." Amelia thought of the past 15 years. She thought of the 12-year-old girl standing at the door of her home, being told her parents were dead. She thought of the 18-year-old girl walking out of an orphanage with $20, and no one in the world. She thought of the 24-year-old woman who believed a man's promises and paid for them with 3 years of hell. And she thought of the woman she was now, standing on a New York sidewalk with a scar at her temple and love in her heart, a woman who had learned that strength was not never falling down but always getting back up. "I want Castellanos to stay open," she said. "I want it to be safe, and I want people to know that silence is no longer protection. It does not protect the victim. It only protects the abuser." Vincent nodded slowly. "Then you will have to keep showing up." "I can do that," she replied, "and I can do it beside you." They parted at the corner as they did every night. But tonight something was different. An unspoken promise hovered between them, a future taking shape from the fragments of the past. Vincent disappeared into the darkness with the quiet certainty he always carried, and Amelia watched until his shadow merged with the city. Then she turned back to look at Castellano's diner one last time that night. The diner stood there, dark and silent. But it was no longer the silence of indifference. It was the silence of waiting, of stories yet to be told, of lives yet to be changed. She touched the scar near her temple, not with regret but with gratitude. This scar was proof that she had survived. It was a reminder that she was stronger than what had tried to destroy her. It was her story written into her flesh, and she would carry it with pride. People would keep telling the story of that night. They would embellish it, trim it, exaggerate it the way stories always change as they pass from mouth to mouth. Some would say the waitress stood up and fought back. Some would say the man in the black suit killed the attacker on the spot. Some would say the diner was haunted by the spirit of justice. But at its core, the story would remain the same. A waitress was knocked to the floor. The entire diner froze in silence. No one moved, and then the door opened, and a man walked in. A man who acted when no one else dared. That was what people would remember. That was the legacy of that night. Not the violence, not the fear, but the moment when someone finally said enough, when silence was broken not by screams but by action, when kindness mistaken for weakness finally revealed its consequences. This story is not only about Amelia or Vincent, it is about all of us, about the times we look away from injustice, about the times we stay silent when we should speak, about the times we choose our own safety instead of doing what is right. But it is also about hope, about the possibility of change, about the power each of us holds to do differently, to step in instead of passing by, to say no instead of remaining silently complicit. If this story touched your heart in any way, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss future videos. Please like and share this video with the people you care about, so we can spread meaningful stories together. We want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and not known what to do? Have you ever been the one who stood up, or have you been the one who stayed silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment and value every story you share from the depths of your heart. Thank you for staying with us until the final moments of this video. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful and peaceful life each day. Remember that you are stronger than you think, and it is never too late to rewrite your own story. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.